Hello, welcome back to another Pen Talk. Thank you very much for tuning in as my OCD takes effect. I really appreciate my viewers. I enjoy doing videos. I enjoy sharing them. The interactions are great. It has certainly added to my enjoyment of fountain pens, and this is a video to commemorate my fourth year, the beginning of my fourth year on YouTube, June 1st, 2014. Here's that first pen video that I posted. It wasn't my first posting because I did do a Dalmatians video as my first posting. Here's my first three videos, the common theme there, Dalmatians and Chinese pens. Here's my second three videos. I've kind of branched out a little bit, but still on the eastern side of the pen world. But before you is my recent focus, as I have a full selection of 992s here, all with standard nibs. Over here I have 991s, with the clear ones being the hooded nib, which I do like a lot. 3003s, which I think are a great deal for the price, just like the 992s and the 991s are. Different style nibs in those. And the best deal for a piston filler is the Wing Sung 3008. So I'm going to go into those with more depth in a subsequent video, but I just wanted to start out with this background. And, I've talked a little bit about how I got into fountain pens, and we'll just give you a brief little story. Back in the 60s, when I was in the latter part of my grade school, and people were, writing was part of the curriculum back then. Cursive writing was part of the curriculum. The classic pen of choice was a Bic ballpoint, which I never really enjoyed. It did write. This is a newer version of the ones that were back in the 60s, but this is very common with that type of pen. They were inexpensive, but I didn't feel that it really was a good thing to write with. So I don't know how I got my first fountain pen. I think I just picked it up for $1 at the local drugstore, which is where things were sold. Could have been a 5 and dime. I don't know. It was probably the $1 no nonsense Schaefer pen that was around. Terrible nib. Not a good writing experience, but I still preferred it to the ballpoints. Time went by. I still use pencils and ballpoints, but fountain pens were something that I still had a lot of interest in. I bought a few better ones as I graduated from college and started having some type of income in the 70s. And then I came across a book. I'm an avid sci-fi reader. I have probably as many sci-fi books as I have fountain pens, which is too many to talk about and to actually count. And I should index them. I tried to put them together by author, but after a few thousand, I kind of lost interest in it. So this book, the main character in this book has some type of mental skill, but he also works in a hospital, and he likes writing with fountain pens. So he doesn't have much money, but what he does is he goes to thrift shops and antique stores and buys vintage fountain pens for $1 or $2, gold points, and really enjoys writing with them. And that's said, gee, I should do the same thing. So I lived in New York City at the time, so that started me on my quest to acquire vintage. And I would get up at 6 a.m. in the morning, go to 6 a.m. I'd get to the flea markets at 6 a.m. depending upon how far away the flea market was. That could be leaving at 3 a.m. in the morning to get there. So I did that for a number of years, and basically I took a limited budget because I still was on kind of a restricted budget, being newly out of school and just working. I also traveled around the world and the country quite a bit, and I always tried to stop in flea markets, antique stores and things like that as I traveled. So I picked up pens there. I was also in Europe, so I picked up some pens there. So I collected a lot. And then towards the mid to late 80s, I would be going to flea markets and I'd see some pens and they were priced higher than I wanted to pay. And they generally had some problems with them, and I called them recycle pens. They were pens that people may have collected like I did 10, 15 years ago, found they had a problem and put them back into the market, and maybe some unsuspecting buyer would pick them up. In the mid to late 70s, fountain pens went from an obscure collectible to a mainline collectible. Books were written, pricing was established. I mean, that's the main thing that makes an item collectible, is when the commercial dealers and people can actually put a price on them and point to a book and go, look, this is what it costs. Whether that price has any bearing on reality, because the price anything is worth is what someone's willing to pay for it. So I stopped collecting in the 90s from the vintage perspective. You know, I'd still occasionally go to a flea market. I'd still sign up, find a few here and there, but it certainly wasn't the cornucopia of pens that I experienced in the 70s and 80s. So then I kind of stopped altogether. I would still buy a new pen every once in a while. You know, in New York City, there were still a number of people selling fountain pens, and I actually bought a big red commemorative in the 90s from Bloomingdale's after they marked it down to 1/3 the original price. That's what department stores did. I've also bought pens at Harrods in London. I bought some excellent pens there. So that's basically kind of the background, and now it's really more of a passion and a hobby. I just enjoy the industry. I enjoy the phenomenal expanse and variety of pens that we have. So that's a little bit of history. I'm just going to throw in some discussion points. I was going to also kind of call this the PETA video, pain in the ass. Because there are certain things about pens, and I try to be positive. I try to look at the pen and figure out why it was made and who the audience is, and then try to put myself in that place and to see if that pen meets what it was designed to do, or what the makers expected it to do, or the audience that it was focused towards. In some of my videos, you may have heard our dog Milo in the background, and my first video was on Dalmatians, so I thought I'd have a little compilation of Milo playing with his squeaky toy before we dive completely into the world of pens. And here it is. So enough of the intro, let's dive in. It was difficult to decide what to include in the anniversary video. I was going to go heavily into nibs, but got long and winded, and that needs to be done in a separate video. So one of the things that I've always thought about is pens that I haven't done a review on, or I've done a review on, and since that review I've learned things that I think I need to share. So this, as you may see, is broken. You know, that I think I wanted to try to remove some ink that you can see there. And this is that Wingsung 659, which I did a video on regarding Pilot 78G lookalikes. So it's a cheap pen. I don't get upset when a cheap pen breaks, or I do something that probably most normal people wouldn't do, but because I enjoy exploring the pens and maybe pushing their boundaries a little bit, things happen. So I didn't like the pens that I reviewed, and I still don't like them. They're really fine nibs, which provide a lot more feedback and really don't, to me, show off the qualities of ink that I really appreciate seeing and also sharing with people. This pen you may recognize is my celluloid pen, and it has an issue. These threads that should hold this into the barrel are gone. I mean, it was metal in here, plastic on here. You don't see any obvious damage, but you know, it's certainly not usable anymore. Pretty pen, but I tend to try to avoid getting vintage Chinese pens because I've had more issues and I've not had any that I've gone wow about and felt that they need to be daily writers. This pen you may recognize is the Muji aluminum pen. It's been around for a long time. A lot of people have done reviews on it. One of my pen buddies picked one up and gave it to me and thought I might enjoy it, and I don't. I know I like metal pens. I think it's a interesting design, the way that the cap posts, but it didn't make my list, and I didn't think there was anything I could add in a review. And here's an Italian pen that I bought. It's an Ultra, and I bought it because I saw a review of a new pen reviewer, and I go, wow, that's interesting, and I finally found one. I like this red accent here between the cap and the barrel. Yeah, the pen is mint. The one he got had a lot of documentation on it. Pull-off cap, which is nice. Ink window, which is nice. Semi-hooded nib, which is nice. It has a push-pull converter here, which is not one of my favorites. I have a few vintage pens with these. This one's very stiff and hard to use. You can see there's a lot of, multiple, at least 2 seals there. Metal rod here is nice. I mean, it's certainly not any pen, and I may eventually do a review on it, but it hasn't made my list. So it's kind of like a little view of something I normally don't show in my videos, or pens that don't make the video. And speaking of celluloid pens, I got excited when I saw these sheets of celluloid for sale on eBay, so I bought one. They're actually the base stock used to make guitar picks. And it's nice. It's interesting. It's amazing that the 2 sides don't match up, considering how thin the material is. But, I'm glad I got it, but I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I think you can heat it up, put it across a mandrel or do something with it and make a pen, but certainly not something I'm going to be doing. So I've experimented with Indian pens. We think that most of the Noodler's pens come from India. So I bought these 2 because I thought they'd be nice. It's a hard rubber, ebonite, interesting designs. This kind of reminds you of a 323 design from Pen BBS. Screw off caps and nice section, but the feed and nib are just not standard. I'd hoped to be able to buy these, and I wanted to put a vintage nib in them. These are eyedropper only. They're fairly well made. They're well machined. They're nicely polished. A lot of threads there, which is what you want. But these nibs in these pens are not something I enjoy writing with, and I couldn't get another nib in there, and I just kind of gave up on them. So they're sitting here. Maybe someday in the future I'll actually do something else with them. And again, I think the design is nice. We're not going to post this pen, but as you can see, this one also has that same type of feed and nib on it. And the section's a little bit more traditional here, a little bit smaller, but, and they came in these really funky little boxes. So more pens from the potential future reviews, and these are all probably going to get a review at some point in time. This is a pen that Bobby included in a shipment he sent me. I'm not a fan of small, thin pens like this. I think it has some interesting design characteristics. Pull-off cap metal section, small metal section, another thing I'm not a fan of. But it has that 2-sided nib, which I think is of interest. Again, we may have that same issue, but here it's metal threads and metal threads. I don't think this is going to strip like the other pen did. And it has your aerometric filler system, which some people are not a fan of, but I'm okay with them. This is another pen that I got from Bobby, which I find interesting. Kind of reminds me of the Cross Snake pen I did a review on a long time ago. But this feels like it's real snake skin or lizard skin, and they put it in here in the top of the cap, which is interesting on the finial. Nice design, which we've seen a little bit before. Kind of reminds me of a bower. And it's a different type of nib. Small, but you know, the feed looks like it'll function right, and I guess you would call that a not quite semi-hooded nib, or not even close to being semi-hooded. And it has what I would call my least favorite is this push-pull converter, which is on a fair number of Indian pens I've found. I just don't like it. You can fill, that's okay, but a lot of times you need to move this down, at least I do, to keep air out and to keep the feed saturated, and I have trouble delicately moving this and ended up squirting a lot of ink out. And last but not least is this pen. I hope somebody recognizes it. So back in the 90s, when I was still kind of looking for pens in strange places, I found this in a artsy-fartsy town, and I liked it. I mean, it's funky. And I like the fact that it posts kind of like some of those Japanese pens that are longer posted than they are when they're capped. Interesting nib, not branded, nothing on it. And it's only a cartridge converter because, you know, there's nothing else that's going to fit in there. And as you can see, a cartridge empty, which I could fill with a syringe if I felt like it. So this one just may end up, I may do some more research. I may actually try to find, I think I have the box, and the box may have some labeling on it. So, but I thought you might enjoy something that I haven't shown, but may go into detail a little bit later. Speaking of fun, funky pens, one of my pen friends gave me this at a pen meetup, and I just find it interesting. I don't know whether it'll make a review or not, but it's certainly an attractive pen. It does post. I may be worried about those little dots coming off, and it has your classic kind of like Pilot Petite one, you know, kind of stamped slide-on nib, and a great little smiley face design. It's a fine. I'm certain it'll write well, because these nibs in my experiences in the past have been that it writes well, so you may see more of this later on, but I just wanted to share, again, a pen that's been in my collection, in my thoughts, but not made a video yet. So the video wouldn't be good without pens I regret buying. It's these two small pens here in the middle, and I have the Pen BBS 308 and a Jinhao 992 just to show you how small these pens are. I mean, these are small. But as those that have watched my video on small vintage, they can have great nibs, and these have 14 karat nibs. They weren't very expensive. I bought them because of another pen reviewer recommended them, and a gentleman in Canada was selling out his inventory, and the price was okay. I've checked eBay, and the prices have gone up on these pens, but these are Merlins. This is a Merlin 33. I mean, the resin is nice, acrylic, celluloid. They're in good shape. I could, yeah, just a little bit of dirt there. You know, I could polish up this and do things like that. It's a standard unscrew cap. Tiny nib, but I just don't like the way it writes. As you can see, that's really ultra fine, you know, carved ebonite feed. And both of these pens are push button fill. They've all been restored, so they're ready to write. But I just dipped these and tried to write with them, and I was extremely dissatisfied with the nib, and I don't really feel like trying to get another nib to replace it because they are branded nibs. So maybe at some point in time when I start selling some things out of my collection, these might be in that first group. As you can see, there was a little bit of condensation on the nib, but you know, it looks like the nib could have potential, but this one needs a lot of work on it, and I really wasn't happy with that. So they just got put aside, and maybe they will just stay put aside. So as a last group of pens to look at, I have these 6 pens put together, and these represent an exploration of nib sizes and how that impacts the writing of the pen. So here you have your Kustoms ink, I'm pretty certain. Here you have your Namisu Nova. Both these have Bock titanium nibs. The Keros Custom has a number 5. The Namisu has a number 6, and I like the number 5. I got the Keros Customs pen before I got the Namisu, and these come with 5s, so I didn't have a choice, but there's a world of difference in writing between these two nibs. This one is good, smooth, slightly soft, but not mind-numbing soft. This one is beautiful, very soft, very responsive. It's springy, it comes back into shape. So, you know, if you're going to buy a Bock titanium nib, if you have any choices, make certain it's a number 6 size. Here's my two pilots with music nibs. Here you have your 74 and your 742. From pilot's perspective, a number 5 nib, a number 10 nib, and then they make a larger number 15 nib. So there's 3 varieties of these gold nibs that Pilot makes. I've never had a Pilot nib that I don't love. And the 74 was really a great deal and great find, and I just enjoyed writing with it. It's, you know, a soft stub, which is really a sweet spot for me from how I enjoy a nib to write on paper. So I was looking forward to getting the bigger size nib in the 742, and it didn't excite me. If I had to pick between these two, I would keep the 74 and sell the 742, or not have bought it in the first place, but I have them. And last but not least are vintage. 2 Watermans, both about the same period and same age, probably in the 20s. Here you have your ubiquitous 52 with a number 2 nib. And here you have your 55 with a number 5 nib. And these are certainly a pretty good size difference between these two nibs. You know, one with a keyhole, one with a heart-shaped breather hole. The traditional Waterman spoon feed. So the nib on the 52 is phenomenal from my perspective. It's extremely soft, extremely responsive to pressure, where the 55 is a good nib, but compared to the 52, it's not. And we're going to close with a writing sample from these two so you can see for yourself. So I really liked what Wasky Squirrel did, where he had his Lamy 2000s side by side, so we're going to try that here. I mean, this nib just flexes without any issue, very fine line if you want, or a pretty wide line, and very wet. So now we have the 55. I mean, this is also soft, but I can't get the same line variations with this pen. Take the cap off, it's hitting the camera, that I can get with the 52. I mean, it's pretty much fine, but not as fine as the 52 on the horizontal strokes. And as you can see, I can railroad it. So this feed is not quite as open. I could play around with these, but you know, I try to appreciate it for what they are. So the other thing to keep in mind is these lay down a phenomenal amount of ink. That's Roher and Klinger Sepia. And if we go over to the 52, that's Singer and Cleats Pacific Blue. So, you know, there's a phrase, I may have made it up or heard it, once you go vintage, you can never go back. And to me, I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of vintage pens, and I have Parkers with soft nibs and Schaefer's, but they're mostly from the early 1900s. Waterman kept soft nibs out into the 50s on some pens. So I have a lot of examples of those, and I appreciate writing with them. I Those of you that have gotten letters from me, you may have had these pens used in those letters. So hopefully you've enjoyed this kind of view of pens and kind of commemoration of my 4th year on YouTube doing fountain pen reviews. Just want to do a big shout out because you know I like literature. So here's the pennant, which is the Pen Collectors of America, PCA quarterly or 3 times a year. This has an excellent article on all the different filling systems in pens. There's a lot. And they're really well done, so I really appreciate that. And I'll learn a little bit. I enjoy reading the articles and hearing other people's views on this wonderful hobby that we're involved in. So, to another year, number 5. So thank you very much. I cannot express that as much as I really feel it, because I get a lot of encouragements from my viewers, their comments, our interactions. I've developed a lot of pen pals from all of you, and it certainly has added tremendously to my enjoyment of fountain pens. So we've reached the end of this video. There'll be more to come. So may you have the most wonderful, the most fulfilling, exceptional, extraordinary, illuminating pen experiences. Enjoy this great variety of pens that we have available to us. So until next time, and you can railroad this one too, bye.